Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads. This is an earlier Weekly Reads than I normally film and upload for two reasons. One, this is my 899th video, so the second video I make today is the 900th video, and I wanted to devote that 900th video to Q&A. So I'll be doing the Q&A response video in my later video on Friday. The reason why I'm filming this video a bit earlier than I normally do my early Friday or my first Friday video, and if I do two videos on Friday, and earlier compared to when I usually film during the week, is because I'm going to go over to my brother's sometime today, and he mentioned between 12 and 1. Although it could very well end up being significantly later than that. He's known to, yeah. But, so I decided to go ahead and film my weekly reads when I know I have some time to do it, even if it does eat into my exercise time. So anyway, my reading week has been mixed. Probably a bit more on the disappointing side than on the enjoyment side, but yeah. On the bright side, I'm looking forward to this weekend. So anyway, so the first book I read, well, the first book I looked at, I bailed on this week, was A Book of Tongues by Gemma Files. I read this for June on the Range, which is a booktube event hosted by Michael and created by Michael K. Vaughan, in which participants read westerns in the month of June. Westerns are a genre of historical fiction set in the American West, mostly in the 19th century. Although the genre conventions of the Western, I think, can be, as long as the setting is the American West, or a setting inspired by it. It could possibly be into the 20th century, maybe the 21st century, maybe earlier than the later 19th century. I don't know. I don't really know much about the genre conventions of the Western. The Western is not a genre I particularly gravitate towards, which is why Book of Tongues is one of the books I selected for June on the Range, because it's one of the few that are adjacent to a Western. Book of Tongues is a weird Western, which is a mashup genre of the Western, which I already explained what it is, and science fiction and fantasy. Although, given the usual setting of the Western, Western with science fiction elements will usually be steampunk, if it's like period specific. Although if it's more inspired by the American West, it could be other genres of space opera. I mean, Firefly and bits of Star Trek are both inspired by the Western. But in A Book of Tongues' case, this is more of fantasy. So in this version of the American West, which this novel takes place a few years after the American Civil War, they're wizards. And wizards are born naturally, but their powers bloom after a severe traumatic event. And so they really haven't influenced history all that much, except for being a known presence, and some wizards and witches being particularly powerful. A particularly powerful wizard is a man named Asher Rook, who leads a band of outlaws with his lover, chess. Let me see. I always forget it. Pargeter. and they basically cut a swath of destruction across the American West. Asher Rourke is an incredibly powerful wizard, and they seem unstoppable. A Pinkerton detective named Ed Morrow is sent to infiltrate the gang, not to bring it down, but to get close enough to Rourke so that he can get a reading. A client of the Pinkerton Detective Agency has created a means to determine the relative strength of any of these wizards and witches. And in order to get a reading, you have to be close. And so Morrow's job is to get close. But despite being a member of the gang for months, he's been stymied in getting readings. All the while, Rourke has been dreaming of a Mayan goddess, Ixchel, who wants him to basically enact a sacrifice that will bring the Aztec and Mayan gods back to the world and do some more epic stuff. So basically, A Book of Tongues is the first book in a trilogy called The Hexslinger. And gradually the series, I think, from what I've gathered, gets more epic as it progresses. So I liked the first part of the book when it's a bit more of a Western. But with the second part, I lost interest. It's just structurally the book kind of falls apart. In that Files doesn't quite deploy sort of her flashback chapters well. So the first part, every other chapter roughly is either set in the relative present and a flashback to something else. The second part is basically a complete flashback sequence about the formation of the gang, which probably isn't necessary. It really wasn't necessary. And then the third part is basically setting up the epic aspect of the story. And by the second part, I quickly lost interest. Rook and Pargeter are fascinating characters, and I think a series centered on them would be kind of cool, but it just, how the story develops just put me off. So I'm happy I lasted as long as I did, but it just fell apart for me, and I wasn't entirely comfortable with how the Mayan and Aztec mythological elements were deployed. Because it just, like, mashing the two together and then just having that mythology being the source of evil in the story just didn't sit right with me. I had some issues with it. So anyway, because there are other evil forces you could have deployed. So after I bailed on A Book of Tongues, I bailed on Sterling Karat Gold by Isabel Waidner. This is a novel that is somehow or other, it's supposed to be apocalyptic, but from what I read, it's just the main character having a fever dream. The first part of the book features the main character imagining that they are a soccer player who somehow or other ends up becoming the bull in a bullfight. And it just, I really did not like this at all. It did not work for me. I did not last very long, maybe not even a chapter, before I decided this really was not a work for me. So on Sunday, I started She-Wolves, The Women Who Ruled England Before Elizabeth by Helen Castor. So this is a group biography of 4 queens, well, 3 queens and an empress, that are bookended by the struggle to succeed Edward VI. So when Edward VI died, now I assume most of you know that one of the great controversies of Henry VIII's reign was trying to get a male heir. He ended up with his first queen, he had a daughter, Mary, and then with his second queen, he had Elizabeth. With his third queen, he finally got the male heir he wanted, Edward. And then the next batch of queens, the other 3 were, just placeholders. And anyway, but with Edward VI's upcoming death, he died young, and basically the only candidates to succeed him were women, Mary, then Elizabeth. Because towards the end of Henry's life, he sort of settled that if Edward did not have heirs, then the succession would go to Mary and her heirs, and then barring that, then Elizabeth and her heirs. And then we'll deal with that issue later. Or that'll be the next monarchs having to deal with what happens when all 3 of them don't have heirs to succeed them. But the problem is that Mary was very much a Catholic, and Edward VI was very much a Protestant. Elizabeth basically diplomatically played both sides, which is largely why the Church of England is what it is. But the thing is that Edward VI did not want to pass the crown to a Catholic. And so he and his ministers, his regents, settled on flimsy means to bypass his elder sisters and pass the throne on to a more reliably Catholic relations, eventually settling on Lady Jane Grey. And so that's the first part of the book, is sort of the setup to sort of pass over Mary and Elizabeth. The meat of the book consists of biographies of the Empress Matilda, the first woman who should have been Queen of England, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Isabel of France, and Margaret of Anjou, who all 3 of whom were Queen's consort to, obviously, Henry II, Edward II, and Henry VI. So one of the things about the book is that what Castor's looking at, in addition to short biographies of the 4 women, is how each of them sort of confronted and innovated the concepts of women in authority, women with power. And also how, like, say, with particularly Matilda's struggles with her cousin Stephen, who usurped her throne or crown, how she had as much trouble in the Civil War, compared to, say, Mary and Elizabeth, who, had an easier succession, largely because, particularly with Mary, because all of the contenders were women. So that was interesting. And then also with the consorts, how, like, with Eleanor, she became an elder stateswoman and regent of England during Richard I's crusade and imprisonment. And then Isabella's usurpation of her consort's, her husband's rule, and Margaret trying to keep her husband's throne for her son. But anyway, so it's interesting. I liked it, but I also found myself growing tired of it at the same time. So my thoughts on this book are rather contradictory. Of course, one of the things is that I've already read quite a bit about Matilda and Eleanor earlier this year. So with them, I had a lot background like coming into it. Whereas with Isabella and Margaret, they were fresher, but in a way, particularly with Isabella, it was more Edward II than her for a good chunk of her biography. And Margaret, I don't know. I have this weird thing between me and the Wars of the Roses, which I don't know how to explain. But anyway, so I liked it, but I also grew tired of it. And then on Thursday yesterday, so I finished She-Wolves on Wednesday. I mean, on Thursday, I didn't quite know what I wanted to read. If I wanted to read some manga or read a collection of poetry. I settled on a collection of poetry because I realized that obviously today I'm going to go over to my brother's and I don't know how much reading I'd be able to do. And I do like to really devote like a good block of reading to manga. So I decided to go with a collection of poetry today, one that I actually got hauled yesterday. And so tomorrow I will be doing some manga reading, which I'll get to after I talk about the last book the last book I read for this reading week, unless I have time to read something today, which I don't know what that would be. So it might be a chapter tag or something if I have time. So yesterday I got a package from Princeton University Press. They had a sale at the end of May that I decided to eventually hop on, but I struggled with determining what I wanted. So I settled on some poetry collections. I've already mentioned two of them. And of course, I'll show all of them in my June book haul. But I decided to go ahead and read one of the ones that I got, and that is A Brief Homage to Pluto and Other Poems by Fabio Pusterla, translated by Will Schutt. So this was a really good collection. I really enjoyed it. Like maybe one or two poems didn't quite work for me, but the rest of them really were fantastic. Particularly like the title poem, Brief Homage to Pluto, was great. For a Fallen Worker was really good. See, the last poem, which is a rather long one called Dragonfly, was amazing. Just so I quite enjoyed this collection. So yeah. So I don't know if no, you go over here because you're going over with the hauled books. I'll hang over here because I have another haul to put into my library later on after I do this. So anyway, you can hang out there. Okay, so what will I be reading this coming reading week? So again, I don't know what I would be reading today because I don't know how much time I'll have to read. But so I'm going to start off on Saturday. So Saturday, I plan to read some volumes of Jujutsu Kaisen by Gege Akutami. I'm going to start with volume 6, which is where I stopped the last time I read Jujutsu Kaisen. And then I'll go to wherever. I doubt I will kind of get caught up with the series. I do have all 19 volumes that are currently out, but that would be 14 volumes. So I don't know. I don't think I'll be able to get all 14 read this weekend, Saturday. So it'll be volume 16 to whenever. and I'll mention that next week. So Jujutsu Kaisen is a manga series set in contemporary Japan. It's about a society of sorcerers who basically protect the world from various sorcerous and demonic entities. One day, a monster attacks the school that Yuji Itadori attends, and attracted by a cursed object, which Yuji proceeds to eat, which allows him to incorporate the personality, a bit of the soul of an evil sorcerer named Sukuna, who left bits of his psychic soul into bits of himself, namely fingers. So after this, and with Yuji's ability to survive, being partially possessed by Sukuna, and being able to contain Sukuna, it's decided by the Society of Sorcerers that Yuji should be killed. But it's brought up that, well, if he can survive eating one piece of Sukuna, why not just collect all of the pieces of Sukuna, feed them all to Yuji, and then once all of them are contained within Yuji, then kill him. So that's what they do. So up until then, Yuji is enrolled in a school for the sorcerers, and he's basically supposed to be taught, but they haven't really gotten around to actually teaching him yet. So I've loved this series quite a bit. So when I stopped, basically the Tokyo school was hosting the Kyoto school in a goodwill event. Although the higher ups at the Kyoto school had their students plan to assassinate Yuji, because they were like, just go and get rid of him. All the while, the group of demons are planning on attacking the event themselves. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to getting back to Jujutsu Kaisen. It's been a while since I read it. And on Sunday, I'm going to pivot to My Hero Academia by Kohei Horikoshi. So I left off at volume 12, volume 11. So I will read volume 12 to whenever. Although there's a better chance of me pretty much reading all of My Hero Academia that I currently have on my shelves, because I'm not caught up with My Hero Academia. Although, spoiler alert for the book haul, I probably will, because I basically just ordered all but 3 volumes that would prevent me from getting caught up. And so I'll probably do that like next week or something. So I will be caught up with My Hero Academia by the end of this month for sure. I just need the books to come in. But anyway, so My Hero Academia is a superhero-inspired manga series. It's about a young man named Izuku Midoriya, who is born quirkless, though he is without superpowers, although he is obsessed with superheroes. One day, his strength of conviction, his willingness to sacrifice himself even though he has no powers, inspires the greatest hero in Japan, All Might, to grant Izuku his quirk, one for all, which can be passed on. So with this, Izuku then has superpowers and is able to enroll into UA, the school for prospective superheroes. He takes on the mantle, or the superhero name Deku, and he and his classmates are then thrust into an escalating conflict with the League of Villains. That even though this superhero world is fairly highly regulated, at this point, the villains are beginning to gradually push the heroes and society to the breaking point. When I left off, a major arc had just concluded, in which one of Izuku's classmates, Bakugo, was kidnapped by the League of Villains as a prospective addition to their ranks. Bakugo is a hot-blooded psycho nut job. It was highly entertaining, and his antics, his look, his superhero name, all of it is, he probably should be a villain, but he's not. He is very, very much a superhero. He's just, yeah, he's just Bakugo. And so the heroes launch a rescue attempt to rescue Bakugo, as well as some of his classmates, even though they are forbidden to. So Izuku, Iida, Kirishima, and Yorozu all sort of go find where Bakugo is, and basically, while the heroes are fighting the villains, manage to free Bakugo in an amazing sequence. And after that, it's decided that the classes are to basically dorm at the school rather than being day students, which is a major event. And I just, obviously, I cannot wait to get back to My Hero Academia. Also Jujutsu Kaisen, because I cannot wait. Okay, so that's my weekend reading plan. So on Monday, I'm going to hopefully find some success with some of my other June reading plans. So in addition to June on the Range, I also wanted to read some work for Pride, although so far the first book I read didn't quite pan out, but I'm hoping a second go at Into by North Morgan will be, although I don't know. So anyway, so Into is a gay novel that came out in 2017 or 2018, because I saw it on Steve Donahue's channel, although he never really talked much about it, except for hoping that it would be a decent contemporary gay novel. I've had this for a while. I didn't quite get on with it the first time I read it, but I'm hoping after a few years I'll enjoy it. But if I don't, well, I have alternatives. Wait. You go over here because you're both doing classics, canonical, modern, fiction, poetry, and drama. You're science fiction, so you stay by yourself because you're the only one I'm talking about this week. Anyway, so if I do end up bailing on Into, I'll then move on to Bad Gays by Hugh Lemmey and Ben Miller. This is a book that is a spinoff of Lemmey and Miller's podcast, Bad Gays, and it features a number of short biographies of gay men and one woman, or I guess 13 gay men or gay and bisexual men, and one lesbian or bisexual woman, and how they are not necessarily, I guess, the most ideal role models in a 2020 sense or something. I don't know. I have to get around to reading it to actually find out what the term, right, yeah. So anyway, so hopefully I enjoy it, and if not, well, I have an alternative. And that would be the other book I wanted to read for June on the Range. Again, I don't have much in the way of Westerns. I don't really want to do a bail redemption of Lonesome Dove this soon, so I'm going to go with a history, and so I'll go with Shotguns and Stagecoaches by John Boessenecker. And hopefully I enjoy it. And if not, well, I'll come up with something. I just don't know what. So anyway, BookTube, this weekly reads has gone on longer than I thought it would. So I'll go ahead and sign up for now. Although I guess maybe so later this evening will be my Q&A, which might be a bit heavy. We shall see. And then next week, if I do decide to do a try chapter tag, I might do that on Monday. Or if there's like a discussion video or something, I might do that then too. I don't know. Tuesday will be a tag video. Wednesday, Thursday, I don't know. And then of course Friday will be weekly reads. So anyway. So until I see you later this evening with my answer to your questions, thank you, BookTube. Have a great rest of your morning, because as I'm filming this, it is still morning. But since by the time this video uploads, it will probably be closer to afternoon. So have a great afternoon and stay safe.